I'm Joeita, and this is The Pulse. The media has a long track record of using stereotypes in their portrayal of people with disabilities. These stereotypes can be negative or positive. Either way, they are rarely accurate. Some of the more common stereotypes that get thrown around? First, the villain. Think Captain Hook, Shakespeare's Richard III, and many of James Bond's adversaries. And the especially notorious Joker, who is depicted as having schizophrenia. Second stereotype, the superhero. Think about the hero of Daredevil. Thirdly, the victim. Remember Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame? What about Tiny Tim from A Christmas Carol? And there are far too many news reports to count depicting victimized people with disabilities. Fourth stereotype, the butt of the joke. Remember Mary's brother Warren in Something About Mary? What about Ken Stutter in A Fish Called Wanda? And the R word regrettably gets dropped in comedy shows far too often. Final stereotype, the eternally innocent child. Think Forrest Gump, I Am Sam, and even Rain Man. I could keep listing stereotypes all day, but that's not the point. The point is that if we want to tell different stories about disabilities, the change starts in the writer's room. Today, we discuss disability, narration, and storytelling. It's time to put your finger on the pulse. Hello and welcome to The Pulse on AMI Audio. I'm Joeita. Today is the first of 2 episodes dedicated to disability in film. We've talked a lot about disability representation, but I'd like to do something different with the next 2 episodes. I want to talk to creators. You'll be hearing from James Rath in our 2nd episode, who is a filmmaker with a disability, about the directorial process and some of the technical aspects of being a videographer with a disability because he's blind. But in today's episode, I want to dig into some of these stereotypes that are so pervasive in the media and talk about the power of telling a different story about disability. My guest today is an award-winning disabled writer, performer, and facilitator who works to Cripping the Script by centering disability knowledge and experience. Ophira Calof recently worked as the inaugural creative director for the Accessible Writers Lab, a national initiative experimenting with accessibility in TV writing rooms. Ophira has also taught a ton of workshops and also provided mentorship internationally on storytelling, creative process, and disability narratives. Ophira joins me today, actually for the 2nd time on this show, to talk about an exciting new initiative. They are one of the producers involved in the Disabled Producers Lab, which has just opened its application window. The National Screen Institute, Women in View, and the Disability Screen Office have partnered to create the Disabled Producers Lab, a new program aimed at challenging reshaping industry norms, promoting accessibility, and also building producing skills. After that very long-winded introduction, I'd like to welcome Ophira to the program. Thanks so much for coming back to The Pulse. It's great to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
I flung the term out there very intentionally, cripping the script, because my first question is going to be, what is cripping the script?
This is a very good question. To me, cripping the script, it's a deliberate use of language to think about the ways in both how we tell stories and what stories we tell. And so when I think about cripping the script, I think about how to challenge, reclaim, and reframe our processes and how we tell stories, drawing from disability knowledge and experience, and also the content of those stories, really thinking about how our conventional story structures often tie into a lot of the tropes that you mentioned in your introduction, and ways to shift our structures to really center disability knowledge and experience.
I want to pick up on this idea of shifting the structure and focusing in on the process. Can you dig into that a little bit more and explain in what ways you would like to see the process change?
Oh, it's so many ways. I think that a big part of the experience of being disabled, at least for me, has to do with not fitting in sort of what's been deemed conventional, right? So there's different ways that we do things across different industries. If we think of theater, if we think of film and TV, the ways in which sort of the templates that we use for behind the scenes production, there's certain established ways of doing things. And those ways typically don't work for me. They don't work for my body. They don't work for a lot of our community in so many different ways. And there's no reason that we have to keep doing things in that way. We can change our production schedules to be more accessible to more people. We can change the ways in which we structure meetings, the ways in which we communicate with each other. We can shift the ways that we present content to be in multiple formats, which, we're doing right here in this interview. So, I don't have to explain that here, but there's so many different ways that we can do things to prioritize those of us who engage with the world in ways that aren't the quote unquote, expected baseline. And so that's really what I'm getting at in this idea of shifting our structures.
But even if you were to contemplate shifting the structure and, making room for different bodies by looking at our processes, to what extent is that dependent on re-evaluating the kinds of stories we tell about disability? Because as long as you're willing to cast the disabled person as a victim or the butt of a joke or a superhero, I think it's very easy to hire an able-bodied person to play that role because you're not really dealing with real people with real lived experiences. So where does this role of the storyteller come in doing this broader work of shifting structures and widening the spaces and creating inclusive processes?
This is so true. I'm nodding along as you're talking because, yeah, absolutely. So much has to do with stories. And I think that that's true both in a broader sense, right? Stories have power. Story shifts. They really influence the way we understand each other, the way we relate to the world around us. So if there's going to be buy-in, we need to have stories really be a part of that. But also, you're right. If you sort of keep the current story template with this idea of the disabled person's going to be the, tragic character that everyone's going to learn from, and they're a two-dimensional character. They're not really one-dimensional, not even two-dimensional. Then yeah, maybe you aren't highly motivated to cast a disabled actor, but even more so, okay, that maybe you do cast a disabled actor, they come on set for one day, they have, whatever experience they have. I've been that actor on sets where I'm sort of wedged into an existing production and they try to make things sort of ish work, but the overall experience is that I'm sort of being added in for a day. I'm not part of the process, and it's not creating an opportunity for people to be a more meaningful part of these stories. The role of the storyteller can shift all of that. When we have stories that feature genuine, authentic, full, complex experiences on screen that can only be portrayed by actors who share that experience. When you have multiple disabled characters in a story and you're exploring, it's integral to the story. It's not, they can be disabled, but maybe not. I believe in representation across all the fronts. Let's have disabled background actors as well as lead characters. But I think that a huge part of it comes in the stories you're telling. If disability is front and center in your story, then it has to carry through to the production. There's no choice. And all of those decisions can kind of flow from that priority.
How do you feel about what they've done with Bridgerton? Because when I was thinking about the show, I was thinking about Bridgerton, and it's gotten a lot of publicity for a racially diverse cast, and moving away from the fact that a Regency period show would typically feature all white actors. And yet it feels like the show is in some ways very colorblind, and they're not really centering race. I mean, Lady Danbury and Simon Hastings, they're kind of still there, but they're still plodding along with the same boy meets girl, wear fancy gowns, go to balls, and then they fall in love and get married and make babies. And I'm wondering if that sort of analogy, if we can work with it, if it would be enough to just slide a disabled character into the cast of Bridgerton, for example, and say, okay, voila, we've got representation. Or do we need to work harder than that?
It's a great question and something I think about a lot. I think that there is value in both is sort of my answer. I'm personally a lot more interested in grappling with disability narratives and really getting into those experiences. I think that sometimes there's a value just to see someone on screen and to have them, it's almost this idea of normalization. I've played roles where I'm a really small role, but I just pop up on screen in my wheelchair. And I think that there is some value in that, sort of the Bridgerton approach of just having people on screen wearing fancy dresses and dancing and, getting to have all the boy meets girl drama and, the Regency era decadence and aesthetic. To me, I say, great, amazing, let's have more of a range of bodies and minds on screen. And because, that is part of our world and we should get to experience all of that too. But to me, it's not enough. We also really need to be able to tell our stories and really get into the experiences. And for me personally, I'm more interested as a creator in those.
And I think this is a good place to talk about the Disabled Producers Lab, which I think is going to help us get access to some of these stories that are not being told, that center disability. Can you tell me a little bit more about what it is?
For sure. Yeah. So the Disabled Producers Lab was an idea that's sort of been incubating for a couple of years now. And it was co-created between myself, Michelle Asgarali, who's a really fabulous disabled filmmaker and producer, and also just a really cool human. And also Jan Miller from Women in View. We were having a lot of discussions about where some of this change needs to happen. And the answer is everywhere, right? Like we have so much to do in terms of really getting our stories out there. But sometimes when we think about representation, we only think about the actors on screen. And then, as you said, we have to think about who's creating those stories. So then you think about the writers and directors. But in film and TV, a lot of the decisions, both creative decisions, but production decisions, come from the producer. And so if we're thinking about creating an industry where disabled creatives can thrive in multiple positions, we really need to have more disabled producers leading the way in creating those production schedules and environments. So in this lab, it's going to be starting in October. It'll be going on over the course of approximately 12 weeks. And there's a couple of different components to it. There will be group sessions where we'll really explore what producing is, learn about how the industry works, and then also explore does that work for us? If we're thinking about accessibility and new ways of doing things, what are alternate approaches we can take? What other considerations do we need in things like budgeting and breaking down a script and hiring cast and crew? What are some of the things that we can think about? Each participant will also be developing a production plan and pitch for their own short film. And we'll also be creating a case study report from all of our discussions together to share with the broader industry.
And who is this program open to? And how many spots do you have available?
This program is open to, so for this current iteration, you have to be either a Canadian citizen or a resident. You have to identify as sort of under the disability umbrella, although we totally understand whatever language you use to self-identify, as long as you have a connection to disability that's permanent, episodic, or whether it's visible or invisible, whatever your experience is. You have to be 18 or older. And you have to, for this iteration, we're focusing on disabled producers who also experience marginalization related to their gender. So whether you're a cisgender woman, a trans man, whether you're non-binary, two-spirit, agender, we're going to be diving into the experience of both gender and disability in navigating the industry.
Can I ask why that was? I was intrigued to note that you were focusing in on people with disabilities who were gender diverse or gender marginalized. When there is so little out there for people with disabilities, why did it make sense for you to further narrow it down and ask people to think about both of those things, gender as well as disability?
This is a great question, and it's something we've had a lot of discussions about. Women in View, one of the partner organizations, recently published an on-screen report looking at gender across the industry, and they really found that often within different diversity initiatives in the industry, people who are gender diverse or marginalized by gender often get lost within those initiatives. And the statistics show that typically people who are marginalized by gender within communities that already are very underrepresented and lacking opportunities tends to not get a lot of space. And so for this particular iteration of the lab, that was part of what spurred us to focus the criteria, and also to make sure that we can really dive into those conversations, because it does add a different layer to how you navigate the industry. Our hope is that this lab will grow and that we'll get to have many different iterations that might focus on different experiences too. But that was the reasoning for this first one.
And do you have to be uber experienced in making films before you put in an application? Like what sort of qualifications are you looking for here?
So you definitely do not have to be super experienced in making films. We totally understand. The whole reason there's a need for this program is because there are so many barriers that exist for disabled creatives to be able to get those kinds of credits in the industry. What we're looking for, we are looking for a certain amount of experience, but it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have made a film before, you don't have to have an industry credit. We're looking for people who have put projects together before. So that could be a podcast, for example, where you're
Is that a hint?
I mean, the wheels are churning. Tiny hints. But it could be anything where you have coordinated some sort of project through different phases. So reaching out to people, putting together teams, putting together schedules, budgets, and potentially presentation as well. So that could be in a lot of different areas. It could be community organizing. It could be in live performance. It could be, a visual art exhibit. We're very interested in getting applications from people who have experience in different worlds. as long as they are interested in producing in film and TV.
Can I ask you a tough question? When people have initiatives like this, it's great. I'm not going to knock it. I think it's fantastic. But what ends up happening after the 12 weeks is people have a portfolio or they have all this experience and knowledge that they've gained. And then they get turned out into the world and suddenly they're up against all the barriers that existed 12 weeks ago. And there's a certain amount of, I think, frustration that creeps in, that the ableism that made a program like this necessary in the first place hasn't really been resolved. How does one deal with the broader structural issues in the, how do you sort of make those connections between the work that you're doing with 5 participants over the course of 12 weeks and needing to make some of those broader system-wide changes that we talked about earlier in the conversation?
This is such a good question. And something that I think about a lot. To me, it's the idea of, so you create a program and you say, come in, the water's fine. And then someone jumps in and you say, oh, wait, there's sharks everywhere. Sharks are everywhere. Whoops, sorry, I just wanted someone else in the water with me. Yeah, terrible, and not at all what we want to do. I think the way that I think about this program in particular, and it's why the case study report is so important to me, is making sure that this isn't just about training people up to work in an inaccessible industry and process, because no one can thrive in that. That doesn't help anyone. And you're right, it's an awful feeling. I've done it. I've been in those programs. So built into this program, we have a lot of learning opportunities, not just for the participants, but for the industry. We're really seeing this as a dual learning opportunity and hoping we have a full knowledge mobilization plan to take all of the findings and be able to distribute them. And, we're already talking to different production companies, hoping to make those connections. So that's the sort of within the program, the short answer. But I think that the more complicated answer is that even with those initiatives, it still is a huge challenge, right? Like we're going to publish this report. We're going to hope it gets as far as we can. We're going to have all the conversations we can. But a big part of the program too is going to be having those conversations, frankly, with participants and trying really hard to support them with what their specific goals are and using the network of the program to try to boost them, knowing that it's not perfect and knowing that ableism is this like many-headed monster that just keeps sprouting a new head every time we find a way to address it, and hoping that the community building aspect of the program is something that can last a lot longer than the 12 weeks.
But I'm wondering if things are not changing. I mean, I'm not just talking about attitudes towards people with disabilities changing, but I feel like if you look at some of the conversation around Netflix and the pressure that they're under to actually feature Canadian content. And, if you think about everything from a public broadcaster, whether it's the CBC, right down to other networks and channels and things like that, we think about just the TV landscape, you can obviously build from that. But are we not seeing a moment in Canadian television in particular where there is truly an appetite for some of those previously unheard voices? And maybe this is the moment when we see some of that change happening.
I really hope so. And I feel, I had a meeting this morning that was with some people who are doing another program for disabled creatives. And we were talking about maybe there's some possibilities to work together. You look around, you see programs like Access CBC popping up. There's work in the States with the Inevitable Foundation and Respectability, and Indivisible is another company that's doing some really cool work in production accessibility. It feels very much, to me, I feel like for a while there were people who, I called it hamster wheeling. We were all kind of working in our little wheel, chugging along. And it really feels like with the Disability Screen Office too, that there's the chance for connections to be made and for people's work to sort of uplift each other and more shows. I mean, One More Time was on CBC and Push that both featured some disability forward stories. The Squeaky Wheel is launching tonight on AMI, or I'm going to rephrase that. The Squeaky Wheel is coming out, which is really exciting too. So it definitely feels like there's momentum, and it feels like there's people really connecting and lifting each other up as well, which is quite exciting.
Remind me again when the deadline is and what the application process actually entails. Do you have to fill it out online? And if you are struggling to fill it out, is there somewhere that you can get some help?
Yeah. So the application deadline is July 22nd. We tried really hard to make it pretty short because we've all filled out lengthy application forms that take forever, and we had no desire to make anyone do that. There's sort of three main questions. There's an online form that we tested to be screen reader friendly, and you can fill out the online form in paragraph style with point form notes. But you're also welcome. We really want to just get the submissions in whatever way feels best for you. So that can include sending in a video or an audio file. We welcome applications in English or in ASL. And we also can set up an interview with a note taker who will transcribe your answers. So if you just want to chat through the questions as opposed to, writing them out separately, we can set that up. So for any support of that nature and for any questions, we have an email address. It's DPL, so the first letters of the Disabled Producers Lab, DPL at nsi-canada.ca. And that's on the webpage too, the program webpage. We really, our peer support coordinator, their name is Denny. They're so wonderful. And they're checking that inbox and ready to offer that support.
Amazing. It sounds like such a great opportunity, and I am very excited for the program, and I am very excited that you're going to be a part of it. I hope you'll keep us posted, especially when the report comes out, because I love talking to people about their reports and their findings. Those are great conversations for me to have. So I hope you'll keep us in mind and you'll come back to share some of the findings once the program is up and you've had a chance to compile your report. Ophira, thank you so much for joining me on the program today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really great to connect.
There goes Ophira Calof, who was talking to me about the Disabled Producers Lab. We will put more information in the description, including the email address and where you can go in and fill out the online form. I really do encourage you to put yourself out there and apply if this is you, if this is something that you think you'd be interested in. You're never too old or too young to take a leap and try something new. If you think you'd want to give something, if you've ever thought, I could potentially make a short film, I have all these stories inside me that I am burning to tell, then don't be shy. As you heard, you don't have to sit there and crank out lengthy answers to questions. But I hope you will reach out and you will fill out the application. Unless you try, you'll never know. So good luck to anyone out there who's applying. That is it for our show today. If you have any feedback for the program, you can write to us at feedback@ami.ca. Give us a call at 1-866-509-4545. That's 1-866-509-4545. Don't forget to leave permission to play the audio on the program. You can find us on X at AMI Audio. Use the hashtag PulseAMI. You can also find me on X at Joeita Gupta. You can also find us on Facebook at Accessible Media Inc. So a couple of ways to get in touch with the program. And do let us know if you have any feedback, questions, or comments. I have noticed that there are a ton of comments down below on YouTube. And of course, if you are listening on the podcast or if you're watching us on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe and be notified about future episodes, just so you are aware. We drop a new episode about once a week, so I hope you will tune in for that. Jordan Steves has been our technical producer today, along with Mark Aflalo. Ryan Delahanty is the coordinator for AMI Audio Podcasts. Want to extend a special thanks to Greg David from the Accessible Media Inc. marketing department for arranging this interview. And of course, Andy Frank is the manager for AMI Audio. My name is Joeita Gupta, and I've been your host. Thanks so much for listening.